I think you're good.
Okay, good. Because if it's like noisy, I'll turn it off. But I'd prefer not to melt.
Yeah. Let's see. So I started the broadcast.
It looks like it's live.
Okay, yeah, it hasn't started on the... Okay, there we go. Now it's going.
Yeah, there's usually like a little bit of a delay. So
yeah.
If you have the YouTube tab open, mute it, or it will be echoing.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, there we go.
I'm like pulling up all my notes right now. I'm very excited.
I have discussion questions. I hope that they're good.
I'm sure
they will be. Yeah, see?
I have full confidence in you, Taylor.
Mm-hmm. I was going to be that annoying person who reminds everyone that they studied abroad every 2 seconds, because when I studied abroad in London a couple years ago, they took us to Bronte country, so we got to visit the Bronte parsonage, and they took us on a surprise hike through the moors.
Oh my gosh.
And so we got to like walk around the moors, and it was 2 hours, and no one had expected it. And it was a very grueling walk, but it was just really cool to like get the sort of atmosphere that they had, and it was beautiful. And I was going to take one of the pictures that I took back then and like put it up on the screen so everyone knows that I studied abroad.
I mean, I support it.
I didn't have time to find a good one. Also because they're buried somewhere.
That sounds amazing.
It was honestly fantastic. No one was looking forward to that trip except for me. And I was like, guys, it's Bronte country. That was also when we had to read Wuthering Heights, and no one in my class read it. So I can just go ahead and do a quick intro while people sort of trickle in.
Perfect.
So, hi everyone, I'm Taylor from Page Screen Taylor. You're on my channel. And welcome to our inaugural live show for our Past It Classics book club. We are talking about Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte, and this was what I wanted to do for sort of my first Past It Classics live show that I wanted to host, because everyone tells me to read it. I never got around to reading it, and whenever someone did recommend it, I just went ahead and read Jane Eyre instead. So it was nice to finally read this, but before we get into our sort of thoughts on the books, Cara and Julia, would you two like to introduce yourselves? Whoever wants to go first.
You go first.
Okay. Hi everyone, my name is Cara. My channel is Wild Book Garden. I'm really excited to be participating in our first Past It Classics show. I have read Wuthering Heights once before, and I actually really liked it. I was shocked at how much I liked it, because basically everyone had told me that it was incredibly depressing and kind of sucked. So I was very pleasantly surprised the first time I read it. And it's funny because I've also heard that generally people either like Wuthering Heights or they like Jane Eyre. Like, there are a few people who like both, but they tend to fall into either or, and that's definitely true for me, because I much prefer Wuthering Heights, at least so far. And yeah, so this was only my second time reading it, and I'm really excited to discuss it with everybody. Yeah, and because it seems to be one that people have very strong feelings on, which always makes for really good discussions, so I'm looking forward to it.
And I'm Julia from Shakespeare and Such, and I am also so excited for our first live show and the first of our trio of Brontes. I have also read Wuthering Heights once before. It was about 2 years ago, and I was not a very big fan. I think I had given it 2.5 stars at the time, but I will say my opinion of it has improved. How much, we will discuss, but
yeah, we can go ahead and talk into our overall thoughts on the book and our rating, and if you have read it before, like maybe go into a little bit what you think of it now. So I don't know if it do either of you want to start? I can go too.
Yeah, either. This is always our problem when we do.
You go first. No, you go first.
Yeah.
I can go. So this was my first time reading Wuthering Heights, like I said, and I thought it was good. I think I haven't rated it on Goodreads yet, but I think I'm going to give it a 3 out of 5 stars. It was good. There were just some, I don't know, there were some things that I didn't care for. I didn't like any of the characters, none of them. And while I am always down for a good book that's basically just a gossip session, after a while I was like, lady, why are you here? I did like the sort of atmosphere of Wuthering Heights, and I told Cara this before the live show started, but I did break out my huge collection of feminist essays on Gothic literature for this book. And after reading in this book, the Wuthering Heights essay is 60 pages, so I read the first 20 pages of it. And after reading the first 20 pages of it, I do have a stronger appreciation for it, and I'll go into that a bit later because it has to do with some of the other discussion points that I brought up. But yeah, I liked it, didn't love it. Yeah.
Well, do we want to stick with a similar opinion and then move on to potentially a higher one?
Let's do that.
So yes, I did end up raising my rating from 2.5 to about 3 stars. I say about just because of my own convoluted rating scale, but 3 stars is the closest that it is. I agree with what you said. I don't like any of the characters. I'm fine with Nellie, but like, did Nellie improve anyone's life or really change any of the events? No, she was just kind of there observing it all. So I would have liked her more if she could have helped someone. Yeah, it's a weird, a weird book. And I take some issue with like certain pacing things about it. I think like the double framing device is weird to have like Nellie telling the story and then having what's his name, the other guy,
Lockwood.
Nellie told him the story. I'm like, why do we need both? But I don't know. I did grow to like it more. When you can read it and not expect to be reading this sweeping romance, I think it's a lot easier to get into it. Whereas the first time I was like, oh, everyone talks about Heathcliff and Kathy. And then I was like, oh, no. So having a different lens to go into it, I think, heightened my appreciation.
Yeah, so the first time I read it was a few years ago, and this is funny because Taylor was joking before we started about how like she's going to be that person who brings up study abroad all the time, but I'm actually going to do that because it's relevant to my experience. Because the first time I read it, I was studying abroad in Ireland, so obviously that's not the same country that Wuthering Heights takes place in, but it was very like gloomy and rainy and blustery, and it was like perfect atmosphere for reading Wuthering Heights in. So that like affected my feelings. And I kind of mentioned before how like I went in with like rock bottom expectations. Like honestly, I did not expect to care about anything that happened in the book. So compared to that, I actually really enjoyed it. And I also didn't go in expecting a romance. I didn't really know, like I went in kind of expecting everyone to be terrible. So when there were characters who were like slightly less terrible, I was like, oh, what a nice surprise.
Raising the bar for all of us.
Yeah. And I think another thing that was exciting about it for me is I try really, really hard not to get spoiled for classics that I plan to read. So I went in having no idea about what was going to happen. Like I knew Catherine and Heathcliff, and that was pretty much it. So I didn't know that like most of the main characters die like partway through. Like I didn't know that like the majority of the story kind of involves other people. So I found that really interesting. I also had some issues with Nellie seeing all this terrible stuff happen and just being like, what are you going to do? And I'm like, well, you could have done something. Like there were options. But I think another reason I like it, like this time around, I gave it 3.5 stars. And before I gave it 4 stars. So I liked it slightly less this time because I just think I was so primed for a good experience the first time, and I didn't really have that same one this time, but I still really liked it or appreciated it, I guess. And I also think like the ending for me, I really, really like, and it's like a really intensely cathartic experience. Like I feel like I don't know, it's really weirdly hopeful, like given all the like horrible shit that was happening, like for most of this book, to end it on a note that feels like to me the younger generation are not going to make the mistakes of their parents. I feel like is a really like powerful antidote for some other parts of the book. Like it doesn't completely make up for the other things that happened in the book, but it makes up for some of it to me. So I have like very complicated feelings about Wuthering Heights because a lot of it upsets me and makes me angry. Like I really forgot how much of the beginning of this is just straight up child abuse. So that was really intense and like just domestic violence all over the place, horrible human beings, but I still kind of care. So yeah, very, very conflicted, but overall I think I like this one a lot more than a lot of people do. So 3.5 stars is where I'm at.
I do agree with you, Julia, in that I also went in expecting a romance. And we're going to get to Heathcliff in a second, but everyone was talking about how great Heathcliff was, and I heard somewhere that he was like black or at least a person of color, so I was imagining Michael B. Jordan, and I was like, I am ready to get swept off my feet. No. I did not get Michael B. Jordan.
Yeah.
So let's go into characters. So we've got Heathcliff, and for some reason the question I wrote next to his name is, what did you think of his schemes? I don't know.
For revenge? Those schemes?
Yeah, his schemes for revenge, and just what did you think of him overall? And I'm going to get my wine for this, so.
Yeah, that's the time to drink it.
So I can go first if you guys want.
Sure.
So Heathcliff, I think most of us can agree, sucks. pretty objectively terrible as a human being. Really smart though. Like the way that he manipulates himself into becoming the owner of Wuthering Heights is like very impressive. I also think it's interesting how he and Kathy, like this is another thing that kind of changed between my reads, is the first time I read this book, I remember feeling like him and Catherine, like the older Catherine, are pretty much equally terrible people. And I read it this time and like Catherine still sucks. She is also bad. But I think I hate Heathcliff more because he specifically enjoys making other people miserable. With Catherine, I feel like she's really selfish and vindictive, but she doesn't like, I don't know, there's like a couple people that she goes out of her way to hurt, but for the most part, she like doesn't really care as long as she gets what she wants. Heathcliff like gets off on suffering, and I don't vibe with that. So like it's weird because like he's really clever and he's really good at what he does, and like the whole time you're reading about him, I'm like, please just stop. Like just I don't want to be in your head. I don't want to be anywhere near your head. Like this is unpleasant. So
yeah, totally agree with that. And I think that comparison of Kathy the elder and Heathcliff makes perfect sense to me because they're both bad people. I would not be like, oh, there's that little good nugget in you. It's like, no, not really. But hers is that more selfish kind of behavior, whereas his is like purposefully vindictive, trying to hurt others, which is like what makes me so scared of him. But I actually, as much as I hate Heathcliff, I really enjoyed rereading this because I liked reading how the other characters spoke about Heathcliff, which we might talk about more when we like dive into writing, which I'm sure will come, or something like that. But it was just all like the language that everyone used was like very othering, very animalistic. And I was like, wow, this is literally like Victorian to a T, to be like, this thing is different from what I know. And so it is evil. Like he's not a man, he's a demon, he's a monster. And so that was very fascinating to read and absorb.
Yeah. There is a part of me that does sympathize with Heathcliff, especially, dealing with racism from a young age and child abuse from a young age. I get it. I'd be, upset and maybe traumatized by that too. But just, all of his actions were just so awful, and the way he treated Isabella really got me. Like, I wasn't a huge fan of him already, but I was like, you know what? Okay, I'll let this one slide. But, eloping with her and abusing her, I couldn't deal with that. And from there, I couldn't stand him. I do think his race is something that's really interesting. I don't think he's black. Like, I had heard people say they were mentioning him being like Romani or something.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think that's an interesting factor, like thing to include in this book, to have your main character, your romantic hero, be a person of color or be dark skinned, which I think is interesting. So I wanted to know what you two thought of that.
Yeah, I also thought that was really interesting because it's so vague about exactly like what his ancestry is. And it also makes it more complicated because from what I remember reading, at the time this was written, like describing a character as black or even dark skinned could mean anything from they were Italian or another European like character with dark hair to like they were actually like biracial or like Taylor, like you said, I've also seen a lot of theories that he is Romani or part Romani. So it's like there's this huge range of characteristics that can cover, and like the way everyone reacts to him, you can kind of draw some conclusions. Like, okay, he probably like they all are treating him like an outsider, so it would make sense if he were like from another ethnic group that people look down on. But yeah, it's really interesting because Julia, like you pointed out, the language that everyone uses about him is like really like animalistic, very othering, like very like he's not like us, and that makes him bad and frightening. So it's like even before you know, like even before he does anything bad or you know anything bad about him, you're already like the way they're framing him is already like he's the bad guy because he's not like us. So I thought that was really interesting. And Taylor, like you said, there's this sympathy built into that because he had a horrible like childhood, and you can like you said, you can kind of like feel or understand where he's coming from. Like that would be an awful way to grow up, and obviously that would mess up his perception of how you treat people. But it's interesting too because that doesn't excuse all of his behavior. So I feel like that's like, I don't know, that's a really interesting balance or dynamic between like how much is somebody doomed to repeat what they experienced, or like at what point do you become responsible for your own actions, because like you know there's still that culpability, is that the word I'm looking for there? So yeah.
I do see an interesting comment here. Angela says, I find that interesting because he became their expectation, which is really interesting because a lot of people do refer to Heathcliff as like a demon or something. And I was like, okay, well, that's a little harsh. He's devilish. But yeah, he does eventually become, you know, I guess the sort of demon of Wuthering Heights or something.
Yeah, I do feel like it's, and not just with Heathcliff, but the whole book, it's very interesting, that idea of like a self-fulfilling prophecy where it's like, okay, well, if everyone calls me the bad guy, watch how much of a bad guy it can be. And, you know, the same with the second generation and living up to the expectations that are set for them.
Yeah. And kind of related to that, like there's a real big focus on like children inheriting the personalities of their parents. Which I find really interesting. Like, I mean, there's like the physical resemblance a lot of the characters have, like Kathy and Kathy apparently look exactly the same. But there's also like everybody is like so focused on treating characters like they're going to be their parents or going to make the mistakes of their parents, that like when they don't do that, it feels like a victory because it's like they're proving everybody wrong, you know?
Yeah. Well, here's a pro tip. If you want people to not think your child is the same person as you, don't name them the same thing as you. That's my hot take.
There's like 3 names in this whole book.
I know. And half of them start with H. I hate it.
3 names in the whole book. The family tree is a circle.
One of the notes I wrote down is family tree looks like a pretzel. Because everyone like marries their cousin and names them after their sibling or their themselves, or like
literally.
I was talking about this with my roommate, and they were talking about it with their friend, and their friend was like, well, they're all like English people from the 1800s in a small village. What do you expect? And my roommate was like, I expect them to walk to the next village. This is getting lazy at some point.
I'm just picturing all the like everyday ordinary village people watching all this drama happen between these 2 houses and being like, I'm not going up there. Like the rich people are fighting again, we're just gonna stay out of this.
like an 18th century Jerry Springer or something.
Oh, it's a mess.
So, what do we think of Catherine?
Where to begin? Where to begin with Miss Catherine? Literally, where to begin? I don't even know. I don't know. One of you take it away.
I can say I liked her more than Heathcliff. I enjoyed her as a character. I didn't like her, but I liked the role she played in the whole book. She reminded me, and not to bring up Gone with the Wind, but she reminded me of a Scarlett O'Hara type where she is just the worst human being. But there's something about her and the fact that she's so awful that kind of endeared her to me in a way. But she was also a piece of work, and I would not tolerate anything she does in the real world.
Yeah.
But I do like the sort of presence she has over the entirety of the book, even when she's gone.
Yeah. Yeah. She's such a powerful character. Like, even though you don't enjoy her, it's like I can appreciate how well developed she is because she does have that that presence that takes over the entire story. I also feel like she is less awful than Heathcliff. It's a very low bar, but she did pass it.
She tiptoed over it.
Yeah. And I think this partly goes to the writing of this book. I feel like Emily Bronte does a great job at evoking emotions, even for people that you don't want to feel for. Like, Catherine arguably brings a lot of this on herself, and I still feel a little bad for her. I still feel this tiny bit of sympathy when her and Heathcliff continually lose each other, even though it's their own fault and they are both terrible. Like, the way that Emily Bronte writes about it, it's like, I don't know, I feel bad for you against my better judgment. So yeah, Catherine is a very interesting character.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like what Kathy has going for her more so than Heathcliff is in the narrative, the way she speaks and kind of how she's portrayed as just this passionate, wild thing is a little more romantic, and the quote about being half savage and hardy and free. It's ooh, I love that idea, even though I don't really like you. That just kind of, even though she's a bad person, it's just the romanticization of it, if you will. It just kind of makes her more appealing.
Yeah, that scene where she's talking to Nellie, and there's 3 famous quotes in a row, basically.
Yeah.
Where she's talking about Heathcliff, and she's like, "Whatever our souls are made of, his and mine are the same." And the one about if all else were annihilated and he remained, I would go on. But if I lost him, the world would be a mighty stranger or something like that. That's very badly paraphrased. But it's the way that she talks about their relationship. I'm like, it's toxic and messed up, and I don't like it, but I have feelings about it. And I want it to stop. No, but yeah, it's just the writing and the emotional, like you said, Julia, the romanticization of it. It does kind of get you a little bit, even though I don't like their relationship, and they would both have been much happier people if they didn't have each other in their lives. But there's something about it that is compelling, or that is believable, I guess. I think that's one of the things that makes me tolerate this book or enjoy this book, is that it's not a romantic relationship. It's not a healthy one. It's not desirable in any way. But I buy that it's important enough to make this whole story happen, if that makes sense. Yeah,
definitely.
I can also buy why Catherine and Heathcliff would be in love, which is really interesting, because it's one of those situations where I see why they're in love. They should not be together. But also maybe they should be together, because then no one else will have to be with them.
Yeah.
Keep that mess to yourselves.
Exactly.
Right?
And
the collateral damage of everybody else in this book.
My sister has entered the chat, and she writes, Catherine was more likable by virtue of being within vicinity of Heathcliff, which is awesome.
Very true.
Most people were.
Yeah.
We've got Edgar Linton. Does anyone have any thoughts on him?
Little sad applesauce boy. No thoughts.
Yeah, no thoughts.
head
He's
empty.
fine. Yeah. Like I felt bad for him as well. Like when he was little, he was a kind of a brat, but as he got older, I was like, I feel bad for you, but also you make terrible choices like everyone else. Like,
Yeah. I prefer him later, like in his fatherly scenes than I do in the earlier scenes. But at the same time, it's like, I don't know, maybe communicate with your daughter if you don't want her getting in these sticky situations, like help prevent them. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, honestly, I don't get why he didn't tell her, hey, your adopted uncle is really weird. Don't go there.
Yeah.
If we don't have anything to say about Edgar,
honestly,
that covers it.
We could talk about, we've got Hindley Earnshaw, which is, sorry, there are so many Earnshaws here.
Yeah.
Hindley is sad little baby boy.
No, that's
right?
Harrington.
No, Harrington is the gruff one who gets thrown down the stairs, and then Heathcliff saves him.
I just think of them as like the older one and the younger one. So
older is Harrington, younger is Hindley.
Hindley's
no, older. Wait.
I promise.
Catherine's older brother.
Oh, you're talking about, wait, who?
Hindley Earnshaw is Catherine's older brother.
Yeah.
He bullies Heathcliff.
Yeah.
Oh, we're talking about Hindley the elder, senior.
Yeah,
and his son is Harrington, who's the one who gets.
Yes. Okay. Thought we were talking about Hindley Jr. and I was like, no, he is younger than Harrington. Don't fight me. Okay, got it. See, again, if you name people different things, saves a lot of confusion.
It does, yeah.
Yeah, Hindley's awful.
Yeah. One of the other many awful people in this book.
Yeah. And I mean, it's weird to think that, like, if Hindley wasn't a character in this book, like, Heathcliff might have turned out okay. Because their dad treated him great. Kathy really liked him. So, like, he could have been a well-adjusted human being. But no. Because he was suffering at the hands of his adopted brother.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting in this book how there's a lot of characters or moments like that where it's like a lot of people had the opportunity to stop things from going this far and they didn't. Yeah, like they all either chose their own revenge or just like, honestly, I don't know why Nellie didn't do anything, because like the way she's telling the story, she's like, and then I knew things would get bad and I did this thing anyway, even though I didn't want to, and all reasoning was against me, but what are you gonna do? And I'm like, something else.
Yeah, we're gonna get to Nellie in a bit, but Nellie's messy.
She's so messy. Yeah. I don't know if this, like, Taylor, you might have a question about this, so like stop me if you do. But just while we're talking about the main characters, another theory I remember reading probably around the first time I read this book that I thought was really interesting is the possibility that Heathcliff was actually the illegitimate son of Kathy's father. So like Catherine's father, because that was apparently a pretty common thing for like if proper gentlemen or whatever wanted to like take in their illegitimate offspring, they'd be like, oh, I just kind of adopted them. They're my board now.
Found this child.
Yeah, and like the whole scene where he brings him back is so weird. And I wondered too if that's like, because the other thing that like theory said is that possibly explains why some characters were so against Catherine and Heathcliff being a thing, because they were half siblings. So yeah, I don't know like how you guys felt about that, or if you think that is like a possibility, because like I think it could explain a lot. I don't know if I think it's necessarily true, but it makes things make sense more.
That is actually a really interesting theory. Yeah, I also wouldn't put it past this book if they were related. Like, a family tree is ridiculous.
Yeah.
Cousins, half sibling, what's the difference, right?
Yeah, and I don't think Heathcliff would have known about it, but even if he did, I agree, he probably would have been like, doesn't matter, my love is too strong.
Yeah, I actually read somewhere like a post that was saying that it was like very matter of fact the way they said it. They were like, well, in this time it meant this, and so they're definitely half siblings. And I was like, I'm going to take that with a grain of salt because it's like a Tumblr post that someone screenshotted and like I can't fact check this, but it has been living in my brain because I'm like, that's an interesting concept to try to process and would make sense with like how much their father like cared about him. Like, why would you care so much about this random kid you brought home? Like you forgot to bring your actual children presents because you're like, look, it's this kid. He's Heathcliff. It's like, what?
Yeah.
Also, maybe I missed this. Is Heathcliff his first name or last name?
Nobody knows.
He doesn't. I think it's his Christian name, and he doesn't have a surname, honestly.
Yeah.
Okay.
But they call him Mr. Heathcliff. I don't know.
Everyone just calls him Heathcliff or Mr. Heathcliff interchangeably. So
maybe it's Heathcliff Heathcliff.
He's Heathcliff Heathcliff.
Heathcliff.
And this whole time he's like, no, my name's just Heath, you guys. Enough with the Heathcliff.
So Angela writes, I hate Hindley the most of everyone in the book. He is evil for no particular reason. He has every advantage, but his selfishness is so off the charts that his actions are insupportable. Yeah.
You heard it here first.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, even his headstone only says Heathcliff. That's true.
What's that?
One of the comments says, even his headstone only says Heathcliff.
Yeah. Yeah. And like the thing about
no, but Mr. Heathcliff is killing me. Can we highlight that one? I love that.
Yeah. And yeah, the other thing about Hindley is like what makes his so awful, which we were kind of touching on, is that like he's not even responding to anything. Like at least with Heathcliff, he's reacting to his own treatment, and other characters kind of do the same thing. But Hindley's just like, I'm deciding I hate you, and I'm gonna make your life suck because my dad liked you.
For real.
Yeah. Actually, there was a really good let's see. Miss Richard Reeds writes, I think she did a good job with the writing because they're also trapped with each other and they're all very toxic. Yeah.
It does feel like so encapsulated. Like you feel like you're one of them and you're like, I can't escape these households where all this drama is just continually happening.
Yeah. That is another thing about her writing is everything feels so claustrophobic. You are so enclosed
Good word.
I guess sort of two like residences, but whenever you're there, like whenever I was reading any of the Wuthering Heights scenes, like in the actual, land, Wuthering Heights, I just felt so enclosed and trapped there. And I will say Emily Bronte is a fantastic writer in that way.
Yes.
Yeah. And like everybody who goes there ends up trapped there.
Yeah.
Like Isabella Linton and young Kathy and probably other people I'm forgetting. It feels very confining in a really very psychologically scary way.
Yeah, because I do think, as much as he was physically abusive, I think it's just like the mental toll of knowing like I live in this house, this guy runs my life now. It's scary.
Yeah. It's like that fear of like having nowhere to go. Like they don't have family that will take them back or that they can reach. Like I had forgotten actually between my reads of this book that Isabella actually escaped, that she got away from him, and that moment was like this is the first deep breath I've taken in like several chapters. Like
there is an out. So we already kind of touched on Isabella, but I would like to reiterate that I feel so bad for her. I think I almost feel like worse for her than I do for any other character.
This is wild even to me as I say it and think it. In this reread, I was like, is Isabella my favorite character? I don't know what it was, but I was like really fascinated by her. And I had to save this quote because I was like, I don't remember this. And this is like so bizarre that she was thinking this. But she was like, I surveyed the weapon inquisitively. A hideous notion struck me. How powerful I should be possessing such an instrument. I took it from his hand and touched the blade. He looked astonished at the expression my face assumed during a brief second. It was not horror, it was covetousness. And I was like,
Whoa.
Whoa, powerful. As much as I'm sad at her fate in the story, I was very intrigued by her.
Yeah. I wonder if there's like someone who out there who wrote Wuthering Heights from Isabella's perspective, because I would actually read that.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Find it. Find it.
We're going to get into Wuthering Heights as sort of a setting, and I guess kind of a character itself, but Jess, I have to call her Jess. I'm trying so hard not to say my sister. Like, there is an excellent atmosphere of hopelessness and despair.
Yes.
There. And then she continues, everyone feels like they're haunting the grounds, which I think is a really good way of putting it.
Yeah, and very thematically fitting.
Yeah. So next up, we've got Nellie Dean, and I have two questions related to that. Do you think, and Miss Richards Reed's brought this up as well, do you think Nellie Dean is a reliable narrator? And also, if you were Nellie, at what point would you turn in your 2 weeks notice?
It would have been like the second that Kathy was born. I would have been like, well, this has been fun. I'm out of here.
Yeah.
I think when Catherine was sort of like screaming at Nellie, like when she had gotten engaged to, what's his name, Edgar, but was confessing that she loved Heathcliff, I would have been like, okay, this is too much. I am your maid. I am here to do a job. I'm gone.
Yeah. Yeah.
Although, you know what, I have to say, if I was literally in Nellie's position thinking about it, the hardest thing to do would have been to leave, because like thinking about like how she was caring for Harriton, and then he was like, well, nope, you're going over there now, and just thinking like, okay, this kid who I've started to raise into a nice little boy like is now in the hands of these people, like yeesh. And then the same thing, like, okay, well, Kathy Jr. is born, and it's like, well, now I got to ensure that this baby turns out all right, because all this chaos around them. But did she really do all that much? I don't know, but
you're much more compassionate than I am.
That's where my brain would have been. I would have been like, but think of the children.
That's very on brand for you, Julia. Yeah, I like, that's another thing that I kind of had slightly different experiences with this time, because I vaguely remembered Nellie Dean being one of the more likable characters, and I still think she is, because like compared to the disasters in this book, she's like reasonably functional as a human. But I found myself getting a lot more frustrated with her this time, because not only was the way she told the story like, and then I could have done something, but I didn't, like 4 or 5 times, which was really annoying. But I also like, I don't know, I wasn't always convinced that she did care about the people she was supposed to care about. Like with younger Kathy, there's like a few chapters near the end where like she goes on and on about how like she's so devoted to her and she loves her, and she had to follow her mistress at all costs and things like that. But like when younger Kathy is actually growing up, I kind of feel like, I don't know, I feel like Nellie was kind of heartless about her, and like younger Kathy was also kind of a brat sometimes, so like I understand getting frustrated with her, but like there were several scenes where Nellie would do something that made younger Kathy really unhappy, but it was like a for your own good kind of thing, and she never indicated that the reason she was doing it was because it was for her own good. Like we never got the feeling that Nellie didn't like doing the things that hurt Kathy, and she also kind of responded to her as like, why are you crying, you baby? You have nothing to be sad about. And I'm like, I mean, she's got like a better life than some of the other characters, and I guess from Nellie's perspective, it's like she's seen all this other stuff happen, so she's like, you have nothing to cry about. And I'm like, she's like 12. Like leave her alone. Like there was that point where they were walking together, and Kathy was like crying and upset because her father was really sick, and she was thinking about how someday her father would die and Nellie would die and she'd be alone. And Nellie's like, well, that won't happen for a while. And Kathy's like, well, it's gonna happen eventually though. And Nellie's like, you might die before us.
Yeah. Buttercup, you could be the first to go.
And I was like, who says that? So
well, she's a very pragmatic lady, our Nellie Dean.
She is. She really is. And I like her sometimes, and sometimes she just really bugged me. And I don't know, I feel like she kind of fell into the trap of treating younger Kathy like she was exactly like her mother, which I don't think she was. I think even at younger Kathy's worst, I don't think she was as bad as her mom.
Yeah.
So like, I don't know. And I also couldn't tell if we were supposed to blame Nellie Dean for the way she treated her, or if we were kind of supposed to go along with it as like, yeah, well, that's what you get for crying. Like,
yeah. Nellie is sometimes very good at her job and sometimes just not great.
yeah.
And I will say, I think the most sympathetic I am towards her is when her new boss, Lockwood, is just forcing her to sit down and recount this whole story.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, she's also a little too happy to gossip about her, like, bosses, but also, like, let this woman sleep.
I know. Yeah, truly. Imagine someone asking you, like, wait, what happened here? What's up with those 3 people? And you're like, well, let me tell you, like, you have this much to say about them? Oh my gosh.
I think that's kind of why it almost didn't occur to me to question whether Nellie was a reliable narrator or not. I kind of just accepted her as a vehicle for the story, because like a lot of the descriptions she gave of people or their motivations are things that I don't think you would say when you were telling a story about someone else. Like, she kind of felt like an omniscient narrator, even though she wasn't. So it kind of like, I don't know, it sort of didn't occur to me to be like, oh, well, how reliable is she really? You know, because she was so like deeply involved with all of what was going on. I was kind of just like, that's how the book is.
Yeah. And it's like, oh, how convenient that everything you weren't there for, someone wrote you an 8-page letter about. Like, that's handy.
Or like the part where she like runs into like the milkman or like the grocery store worker who's like, I saw everything. Let me tell you.
Enveloped. Like, what?
Yeah. Like, I saw them through the window as they rode their horse. Like,
Yeah. I think while reading the book, I never like had much thought as to whether or not like Nellie was an unreliable narrator. But when I was doing research for the live show and for the questions, everyone's like, is Nellie an unreliable narrator? And I was like, well, now I'm wondering that too.
Yeah. One thing, I don't know if this is necessarily about her being an unreliable narrator, but one thing that I considered, because I was talking about how it bothered me to have, like, what's his name again? The new guy? Lockwood, yeah. Lockwood telling the story of Nellie telling the story, that I'm like, why are we having 2 storytellers? I was just like kind of ruminating on throughout the whole book and thinking of like Nellie being that more like pragmatic, like religious, traditional kind of person. Like, I don't think she would have been like, and Kathy's ghost is haunting us. Ooh. So I think we like kind of needed him to bring out those more nebulous elements, I guess, if you will.
Yeah.
I kind of like the frame device, which I didn't realize until I was thinking about it for this live show, and I knew a lot of people don't, and I'm like, it is kind of nonsensical, but I liked it. And I think it's because like the way that it hooks you into the story is like very much mirroring what's happening with Lockwood. Like, he just goes to rent his house and he gets totally obsessed with this like convoluted history of these families that he has no connection with. And that's kind of what happens when I read the book. Is it's like, who are these people? And then by the middle of the book, it's like, oh, I hope Isabella's okay, you know, like. And I also feel like having that frame story to break it up, it made it a little less like emotionally exhausting for me, because like for a while, especially like the first half of this book, it's just like terrible thing after terrible thing, and nobody is happy, and everyone is dying in childbirth, and it's just like awful things happening. And like to have those little moments of like, and then Mr. Lockwood drank some tea was like, okay, I have like a minute to regroup before we dive back.
Yeah.
Everyone being sad.
Speaking of Lockwood, Angela writes, pretty sure if I was Lockwood, I would have passed on renting the Grange after hearing that story. I would have passed on renting the Grange once I met Heathcliff, and
oh my god,
they had like the dead rabbits on the couch and the wild dogs.
Yeah, the dogs are attacking you, and you're like, I'm gonna pass. Thanks for the tour.
I can't get over Lockwood's initial reaction of like, man, I thought I hated people. This guy really hates people. I'm gonna visit him 3 days in a row.
like it's so nonsensical because if I walked into my apartment to like tour it and my landlord had wild dogs and just dead rabbits, I'd be like, okay, this isn't normal. And about Nellie Dean, Jesse writes, it's extremely easy to forget that she's a subjective, independent voice in the book, which I guess is true. Like, I feel like Emily Dickinson. Emily Bronte is, I think she does intend for Nellie to be sort of, I guess, our omniscient narrator, but it is interesting to think like, well, if, what would happen if Harriton retold this story from his perspective. It's probably something very different than if like Heathcliff told the story from his perspective. So that is an interesting point, but I do think Nellie's just really nosy, and I do have to appreciate that in some sense.
Absolutely.
I appreciate you seeking out every detail of this story to tell us.
Yeah.
What were you going to say, Julia? I'm sorry.
I'm not even sure at this point, so it's okay. I don't think it was anything that deep. Oh, I was going to say, and I do take her at her word for like the events that happened. Like, I don't think she was ever like, yeah, and then he stole Isabella away. Ooh, like making things up. Yeah. I just think maybe the way that she described people was a little biased, because who is not that way when they tell a story?
Exactly.
Yeah. Like, should we even take Lockwood at his word for describing Nellie? He's his own person too. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, that's very true. Okay. We still have a lot of characters and questions. This is a very big book. I'm free for the rest of the night, so I don't know how you two are.
I mean, I got some time.
I'm looking down at my notes and I'm like, oh god, we still have so much to cover.
Yeah, you didn't expect we had all these feelings about all these characters.
Why don't we talk about Kathy Linton, the second Kathy?
Okay. Kathy 2.
Maybe Kathy.
The Kathaning.
Yeah, definitely an improvement on Kathy Senior, in my opinion. I mean, maybe not quite as interesting as Kathy Senior. She's a little more just like, I'm a young, naive girl and I want what I want. Definitely a little more, well, no, I think they're both pretty spoiled actually. But I mean, I don't hate Kathy, but I just like sometimes the way she interacts with people would like drive me up the wall. I'm like, so you don't like him and you do like him, but you just like chose this arbitrarily. And I don't know, it's just like, I can't explain. It's just like she had people that she loved and trusted tell her things, and then she would be like, yeah, okay, and then just form her own opinions, which not that people shouldn't form their own opinions, but it's like, maybe if that guy like seems crazy and your dad who you love more than anyone and you say you love more than anyone is like, hey, he's a dangerous guy, believe your dad. I don't know.
Yeah. I was weirdly invested in younger Kathy this time around because like, yeah, she's not super likable, or like, I don't know. To me, it felt like she had these weird flashes of like being an awful snob and a brat, mostly to Harriton.
And
then the rest definitely. Of the time, yeah, and then like the rest of the time, she felt like a reasonably nice person. Like, yes, she was spoiled and used to getting her own way, but like, she didn't like her actions weren't really bad. Except when she was like interacting with Harriton and Linton. Everyone's named Linton. And yeah, I think another reason, part of the reason that I liked Kathy is I was also like weirdly invested in her and Harriton's relationship. Like, I don't know, that kind of saved the end of the book for me in some
literally
ways.
Same. Yeah.
Like, this is actually kind of sweet, and like by the standards of this book, I'm like, this is like much more healthy and like borderline like cute and sweet. And
yeah.
especially if you forget some of the other interactions they've had, I'm like, this is really nice. So I think that kind of bled into my feelings on Kathy a little bit, because I remembered from the first time I read it that her and Harriton do kind of end up being a thing. I didn't remember that we actually see scenes of them together, which was kind of fun. Also, I'm always a fan of like flirting over books, so that was cute. So like, I don't know, I think my feelings on Kathy were affected by that. But yeah, I feel like, again, it's kind of a comparison thing where like, compared to the trash cans in the rest of this book, Kathy's great. Like,
Yeah.
It's true.
I think she's a really interesting character because she is much less horrible than her mother in some
Mhm.
ways. But honestly, I feel like Margaret Mitchell was very much inspired by Wuthering Heights because I see a lot of the parallels between this and Gone with the Wind.
Mhm.
And you see, like, I don't know, I feel like a lot of times she gets so close to, like, danger until she eventually is in danger, and it stresses me out because there are so many warning signs along the way. I'm like, listen, Kathy, I'm too ethnic for this. If someone tells you beware, go.
red flags all over the place.
Yeah. But I highly agree about Kathy and Harriton. Like, that is why, because I couldn't remember so I have a really bad habit of my Goodreads reviews being the rating, uh, full review to come, and then like one sentence about my feelings. And so my one sentence review from the first time I read it was Harriton was the saving grace. And so I was reading this book 300 odd pages going, when does Harriton become the saving grace? I don't like this kid. And then, like, finally at the end, I was like, oh, it's because of that cuteness we get at the end with Kathy, and he's not being a butt face anymore.
Yes.
So, yeah.
And to be fair, Kathy's options are so limited, she might as well go with her cousin.
Which cousin do you want? The sniveling one, or at least, like, the tall one? I don't know.
Yeah. Who apparently they make a big thing out of, like, he's handsome, but he's like uneducated, so you can't tell he's handsome until he learns to read.
You know, when you're illiterate and so you look ugly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
We can talk about Harriton or transition to Harriton now because I did like him. I felt bad for him. I felt bad for anyone trapped within Wuthering Heights.
Yeah.
Boy can't catch a break.
Nope.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, literally, like, almost falls to his death on the stairs. And Heathcliff is like, oh, I saved him. Oh, I shouldn't have saved him. This would have been the best revenge. Like, oh my God.
Whoa.
Me.
Yeah.
That moment, I can't stop thinking about.
Yeah. Well, and the fact that like prior to that, Nellie is telling this story and she's like, well, I got in the habit of locking Harriton up when his father came home drunk because otherwise he would start like smashing him against things or whatever. And I'm like, like, yeah,
it's like room.
Yeah.
Like, just lock him away from the danger. Like, it's I think Harriton is the character that I have the most sympathy for of the whole book because I feel like he genuinely like stood a chance, had a rough go of it, but then was like coming back around. And so that is, like you said, Cara, very hopeful at the end.
Yeah. I would say he's kind of like what Heathcliff could be because they both had very rough, abusive childhoods.
Mm-hmm.
And
the hands of the same man for part of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And Heathcliff was like turned out so horrible, and I mean Harriton was like not great for some of it, but he eventually did learn and grow and become a better person.
Yeah.
And both of them did end up falling for Kathy. So
story checks out.
Yeah, that idea of like mirroring is really interesting in this book, and I think it's interesting too how like we talked about earlier, there's this big focus, which I think was like a thing in Victorian times of like inheriting personality like straight from your parents, where like if your father is a bad person, you're going to be a bad person and all of this. And so I think it's really interesting that like the main theme or like one of the main themes for this book for me, at least based on the ending, is kind of like that didn't happen. Like people do have a choice about who they become, and like it is affected by your circumstances, like the fact that Harriton finally found somebody who was like nice to him, the fact that Kathy finally started being nice to him, like there were outside factors that helped that happen, but like that's a surprisingly, I feel like that's a surprisingly like forward thinking thing to happen in this like, you know, 1800s classic, is like you're not doomed to repeat the mistakes of your parents. Like you can't be written off as being like your bad blood or whatever in your family. I thought that was like really interesting.
yeah.
Yeah, Emily Bronte was like, nature versus nurture. I'm going to tell you it's nurture, friends.
Yeah.
And here's why. I don't imagine her typing it, but
The quill pen.
yeah, that's what it was. Thank you.
I could tell by the delicate fingers.
So what do we think of Linton?
Can I just say right off the bat, this isn't even an opinion. The next time they make a Wuthering Heights movie, I want Linton to be played by Timothée Chalamet. That is all.
I was going to say that.
Skinny little boy. I just imagine him like sniveling. I love it. Okay, go ahead.
I definitely agree with that. Yeah, I thought Linton was going to be a good guy for a while there.
Me too.
Whoops.
If only, if only.
Yeah.
Shame on me.
I know. I had forgotten that too, that Linton sucked almost as much as Heathcliff. Like, because they straight up tell you, like, he likes to hurt things, but he's just too much of a coward to try. So if you help him do it, he's like just as good at torturing people as Heathcliff. And I'm like, well, I feel a lot less sad that you died. Like, good
Yeah. I mean, like, good for Kathy to like see the good in him, but oh my god, if I was around someone who was like whining that much all the time, being like, there's a draft, put a blanket on me, put more logs on this fire, bring me my book, I'd have been like, I'm gonna go, thanks. Like, I can't stand this.
Yeah. It was like initially I didn't like him, but I felt kind of bad for him because I'm like, you also were stuck with Heathcliff, and that's pretty terrible. But by the end of the book, I was like, my sympathy for you is a lot less now. So, like, bye.
The way that he arrives to Wuthering Heights and the first thing his dad says to him is, your mom was a slut. I was like, oh my god, take it down a notch. Like,
I was surprised the word slut was used so often in this book.
Yeah, it came around quite a few times.
Was like, I don't remember if the word use was different then, because I know that now I think English slang, like slut, means like dirty or like slovenly. But the way he used it in this book is like, I think he means slut. Like,
I think that's what he meant.
Like, whoa there.
Yeah.
I mean, she did kind of throw herself at Heathcliff, so I can see why he would get that impression. But he married her, so you're one to talk. That's your wife.
Feminist, so.
And he saw like her fall in love with one man, which was him. Like, what a slut. Like, I'm like, excuse me, sir, you were snuggling Kathy's corpse. Like,
yeah. Jeez.
That's way weirder.
God, Heathcliff is so weird. Sorry, I know we already talked about him, but I just like to point out the scene where Nellie tells him that Catherine's dead, and he just bangs his head against a tree trunk until it bleeds, and Nellie's just there for it. Mm-hmm. Like, that's also what I would have put in my 2 weeks notice. I would have been like, well.
Yeah. Also, Cara, shout out for you saying that, because you're making me realize that both of my book club books this month both involved people digging up graves and snuggling with their dead loved ones. So what's up with that?
Was it Ophelia?
Get some help. Get some help. Oh my gosh.
What's the other book?
The House of the Spirits.
Oh, Isabel Allende?
Mm-hmm. Very good, but I would say I could parallel those two in so many ways. Oh my god.
Wow.
The worst male main characters in the world are in these two books.
I wonder why that's such a trope. Like, I get why it's such a trope, but I don't know. I don't see anything romantic about snuggling a corpse. Like,
yeah, like especially like Catherine has been dead at this point for like what, 17 years, and I'm like, unsanitary. Yeah. He's like, but it's fine because she wasn't rotting yet, and I'm like,
if you say so.
Yeah.
Heathcliff, no.
Yeah.
So that's it for most of the characters. I also have Joseph and Mr. Lockwood down, but we talked about Mr. Lockwood, and I think we established in our own chat, and I think everyone knows, Joseph is incomprehensible.
Completely.
She should have written his dialogue in Wingding's font. Like, it wouldn't have made sense. What are you saying, my guy?
Yeah. Well, and like I said this in the chat with Taylor and Julia, but for the benefit of people watching, I looked it up. I'm like, what is this dialect supposed to be? Like, because maybe, like, I am not obviously an accent expert. It's probably just something I haven't heard of. It's supposed to be Yorkshire, like broad Yorkshire. And I'm like, okay, I have read and heard strong Yorkshire accents that were intelligible before this. So, like, what's up? And I looked, and there's like this whole thread on Goodreads of people being like, I can't understand a single thing that he says. And like, even people from Yorkshire are like, I had to read his dialogue out loud to understand it, and I still missed things. So, like, even people who know this dialect, who speak it, are like, what is Joseph even trying to say?
I hate it.
I think the wildest thing about this is that I'm pretty sure Bronte country is in Yorkshire. I could be wrong about that, but I'm pretty sure she was from Yorkshire, so I don't know what she's doing.
I looked it up. I think she was born in Yorkshire. Like,
Maybe the accent has really evolved, you guys. And it used to be a mess.
Maybe. Let me like look something up really quick.
It's like trying to write down the Californian accent, but trying to do vocal fries in text.
Oh my god, that's a good comparison.
Hey, just all wise.
Yeah.
So Angela writes about the characters. The thing that amazes me about Emily Bronte is that she literally made me feel bad for every character except Hindley, no matter how badly they behave throughout. And I think at one point every character gets like a moment of sympathy, which is really good.
Yeah. Like, oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Taylor.
Go ahead. I was going to bring up another.
Okay, I was going to agree with that, and like we were just talking about the moment when Heathcliff finds out Kathy's dead and just starts like smashing his head against a tree, which was a moment. But like prior to that, when he finds out that Catherine is dead, I did feel for him. Like the things that he says about her and the things that he actually said to her were like, they're basically apologizing for making each other miserable their whole lives. And she says to him, like, you have to forgive me. I hope you forgive me. And like I think she tells him that she's dying, or she knows she's going to die soon. And he says something like, I forgive you because you're killing me, and I can forgive my murderer. But how can I forgive myself? Like, how can I forgive your murderer, Catherine? And like, just, there's so many good lines about terrible things. Like,
it's a powerful moment.
Yeah. Like I guess that's what my feelings on this book come down to, is like great lines about terrible things. It's like one of the things that happens a lot.
Mm-hmm.
About Heathcliff just going and cuddling Catherine's corpse, Mr. Richard writes, and Nellie asks what would he have done if she had been mushed or something like that. And I just wanted to say, I don't think that would have stopped this guy.
No,
I think he would have slow this guy down.
Yeah. Could have dived right in.
And Miss Richards reads also says, I think if you Google it, someone did. I saw it before, but I can't remember what site. So if anyone is itching to understand what Joseph is saying, which honestly I kind of am, because I feel like I missed out on a bit of the book.
I think everything he said was, ugh, you all should be in church. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
I think that's basically what he said every time. So he literally was telling them, you need Jesus. And he was
while also like simultaneously being a bad person, which is like,
yeah, really rich.
Yeah. And like the thing I feel about Joseph is, from what I could understand of his dialogue, which admittedly was not a whole lot, it didn't seem like he was that important to the story. I'm like, you could have been removed and nothing would have changed. Why are you here? Like, the other characters have a purpose, and Joseph does not, except to confuse us and make us think that Emily Bronte did not understand Yorkshire, possibly.
So I don't know if anyone else has anything to say on any of the characters, but if not, I would like to move on to sort of setting an atmosphere. So originally I was just going to go through everything individually, but there's still more to talk about. So I just want to know what you thought of Wuthering Heights, Thrushcross Grange. Why do you think Emily Bronte chose to set this book in the moors? And if you have anything on what you think of the atmosphere in this book, because I felt personally that this book was so atmospheric.
Big time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you have any thoughts. We kind of did get into like Wuthering Heights and the vibe around it earlier. But
It is funny because as much as, like you said, Taylor, it feels very claustrophobic, it is funny to think that like these two buildings were not close. Like they would walk for whatever they said, like hours to get from one to the other. So it's like, it's weird that it can feel so small when it's actually like this big scope of land. Um, and this isn't really a coherent thought. It just really like makes me happy that both of those, like Thrushcross and Wuthering Heights, both are like so vivid in my mind. Like I have like a mental blueprint of both of these houses, and it's like, why? She doesn't even describe them that much, but I have like very vivid scenes in my brain, and so that's delightful to me.
Yeah, and kind of similarly, about like the lack of description that is somehow very vivid, is like this book is amazingly atmospheric to me, considering we don't actually spend a lot of time on the moors. Like I was surprised because I remember it being such an atmospheric reading experience, and it is, but it's almost like you get a little bit of the descriptions of the actual like physical environment around them, but it's like the characters are the moors. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's like this idea of like this really bleak but beautiful at the same time kind of environment. And like, I don't know, I feel like that's kind of mirrored in these terrible characters who declare their love in really beautiful ways. Like, and yeah, and like kind of like we were talking about like the claustrophobic like atmosphere. It's like, this is such a like definitive like blustering on the moors book, considering they don't spend a lot of time there. Like, I just think that's super interesting and really impressive.
Yeah.
I think I would like to throw out the word secluded as like part of the atmosphere as well.
Yeah. Something that I did want to bring up, it from in the Woman in the Attic, there's this essay called Looking Oppositely, Emily Bronte's Bible of Hell. And it sort of brings up the fact that their dad, whose name I forgot, so Papa Bronte, is a huge fan of Milton. And like read Paradise Lost and so on to the Bronte children. And the essay was sort of drawing connections between Paradise Lost and Wuthering Heights, as well as the idea of the estate of Wuthering Heights being a sort of hell. The fact that Heathcliff is sort of described as a demon and so on, living in Wuthering Heights. And this is me finally putting this English major thing to work. But there's also this sort of quote from Kathy. If I were in heaven, Nellie, I should be extremely not Kathy, Catherine. I should be extremely miserable. I dreamt once that I was there, and that heaven did not seem to be my home, and I broke my heart with weeping to come back to earth, and the angels were so angry that they flung me out into the middle of the heath on top of Wuthering Heights, where I woke sobbing for joy.
On top of the heath or the Heathcliff? You know what I'm saying?
Hey.
Sorry, not to take away from what you just said, which was great.
Yeah, that was also really good. But I did think that was really interesting to have Wuthering Heights as a sort of hell. Area that, honestly, Catherine would prefer to be at, I guess.
Yeah.
Or like she'd prefer to like haunt the earth, which is like what Heathcliff also wants to happen, which is super interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, and also like one of the things that I think like kind of symbolically mirrors how relatively hopeful the ending is that when Hareton and Kathy, younger Kathy, are going to get married, they're going to move back to Thrushcross Grange, which I don't know why I have such a hard time saying that word quickly, but
it's a tongue twister.
There's too many R's in a row. But like, but I think that's really interesting because it kind of does play off that idea of like they have to get away from Wuthering Heights. They have to like move away from this history and all this suffering that has like built up there over how many generations. And like they're moving, like it's still to one of the two houses, but it's like the one that has been happier of the two.
Yeah.
I think if there was like a modern Heathcliff and Kathy AU, if you will, the first song on the playlist that either of them would make for each other would be "I Would Follow You" or "I Will Follow You Into the Dark," because That's just them to a T.
Honestly, that would be so fun to do like a Past It Classics playlist and like for Wuthering Heights, and it's just sad music.
Sad.
I Will Follow You Into the Dark and then Wuthering Heights by Kate Bush 9 times. That's all I've been listening to. So,
part of me, and I haven't looked into this that deeply, but I am wondering if it's anything like how people interpret Psycho, where you have like each level of the Bates home and motel represents like the id, the ego, and the super ego. Whereas I think maybe with Wuthering Heights, it's like one of them is maybe, I guess, heaven. I don't think there is an exact equivalent, but like heaven, earth, and hell, with Wuthering Heights being hell, and maybe like the moors or Thrushcross Grange being earth or something.
Interesting.
Yeah, don't quote me on that because I didn't look into it too deeply, but I'm just playing this by ear.
No, I like the idea of it though.
Some Miss Richards writes, I think she chose the moors because it fit her story and the characters. She did a great job of writing the atmosphere. Absolutely. And I can't remember who mentioned exactly that the more like everything was very isolated, but I do think that helps too, because I feel like if people were just doing this stuff in town, people would be like, okay, listen, you can't do this in London.
Yeah.
A little too weird.
Yeah. Well, and like the fact that Heathcliff has like absolute power essentially was like over everybody in Wuthering Heights. It's like, yeah, that couldn't really happen if they were in a more populated area. Like there would be other people to be like, hey, I haven't seen Kathy Linton in a while. Has she been kidnapped? Yes, she has.
It's like the Amityvilles of the moors.
True.
Yeah. This place is weird. So I feel like we've discussed this already, but one of my other questions is, would you consider this book to be a Gothic novel?
I'm a strong yes on that.
Absolutely, yeah.
Even though we don't have like a big Victorian manor or whatever, like I feel like just that, like I was saying earlier, like the concept of like the Gothic unknown as like, you know, the bad thing isn't necessarily like, oh, Heathcliff is the villain. It's that like we don't understand him, and so he's this scary thing. And I mean, like literally, can I just like some of the words that I jotted down that people were describing him as? A goblin. His mouth watered to tear you with his teeth because he's only half a man. Basilisk eyes, sharp cannibal teeth. Is he a man or is he a demon? Like a savage beast. It goes on and on. Like, it's scary.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think Heathcliff also sort of plays into the Byronic hero. You know, he's not particularly desirable, but he does, I guess, sort of fit a lot of the qualifications of a Byronic hero. And you do still have the big manor. It's Wuthering Heights, and it's kind of janky, but
yeah, it's just different than how we picture it in our mind's eye, but it is there.
I feel like, it to me almost feels like a Gothic, like a very classic Gothic novel if you just took out the house part and kind of left everything else, which like you said is like, you know, the Gothic unknown and like these really like this like obsessive love is another thing I kind of associate with Gothic novels is like I would rather die and bring everyone down with me than lose you kind of thing. And like we were talking about like this sense of atmosphere and like this feeling of being trapped in all this stuff that's happening, like all of those to me feel very much like a Gothic novel. And it kind of feels like Emily Bronte just created those feelings without using this one Gothic mansion as like the focal point. Like Wuthering Heights does, it is like a very powerful setting, but none of them really feel like the typical like Gothic manor where everything happens.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not like there's all these like secret rooms or whatever, like forbidden spaces. It's just that it's like the claustrophobia again of like we're alone and we're trapped here and there's nothing I can do about it.
Yeah, it's almost like it almost to me feels scarier than like a physical like, oh, I'm stuck in this creepy house because it plays off of much more like human fears of like there's like this woman is stuck with this abusive man and she can't get out and no one knows she's there, and like I don't know, I feel very like, even though the atmosphere is really like over the top, it feels very like real world scary, I think.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think especially because a lot of it is rooted in reality. You do have this element of like ghosts and spirits and the supernatural there, but so much of it is rooted in reality, and honestly that's a bit scarier to me, the fact that Heathcliff is a real man and can exact real harm on the people he's around.
Yeah
Yeah,
that's what I always say about horror movies. I'm like, if you just show me like a spooky ghost story, like it's gonna scare me, but it's not gonna scare me as much as the movie about a serial killer, which could very much happen to me. Like I'm less concerned about a ghost coming into my room, you know?
Yeah. And I think that's it for my main question. I did have a question about how do spirits and the supernatural play into this book. I don't know if either of you have any opinions on spirits or the ghost of Kathy.
Yeah. We kind of talked about it a little anyway. Like Heathcliff reiterates several times, he's like, I'm a big believer in ghosts, big fan of spirits. And,
baby.
he's like, he's calling out for Catherine to haunt him, and then it's not funny, but it is kind of interesting that later he's like, man, Catherine's really haunting me, and I'm like, you did ask her to. Yeah, but I do think that there is this like feeling of being possibly literally, if Heathcliff like is actually experiencing a haunting, like, but definitely figuratively being haunted by the other characters. Like we're talking about how Catherine has such a strong presence over the whole novel, even though she's not alive for very much of it. So yeah, I feel like the talk of ghosts and the characters that like believe they're seeing a ghost or just like speak about them, I think it's kind of a reflection of the overall feeling of being like haunted or followed by people that you've lost. Like there's like a big emphasis on grief in this book, which is not always obvious because like people respond in really interesting ways to it. But yeah, so that's kind of my thoughts on that.
Yeah, I will say like there are like ghosts and like a supernatural element to this book, but I do think there's a lot of emphasis on, and I am a big fan of this, ghost stories without ghosts, and that I feel like a lot of the ghosts here are just the children of past people. You know, or the children of these past people also being haunted by the actions of their parents as well.
Yes.
You know, the younger generation haunts the older generation, and the older generation haunts the younger generation.
Yeah, and I feel like we see that in like the physical resemblance between characters that they like really focus on, but also like something I really noticed is the way that names are used. And like we were joking about how there's like only 3 names in the whole novel, but it's really interesting to me how like I was thinking about how, so Catherine Linton, I have to like stop and think about who is who, but like younger Kathy, who is originally Kathy Linton, she marries Linton Heathcliff, and so she becomes Catherine Heathcliff, which is interesting because like the original Catherine and Heathcliff were the ones who were like in love and who kind of like made the whole story happen. So then you have like younger Catherine Heathcliff, but then she's going to marry Hareton Earnshaw, so she's going to become Catherine Earnshaw again, which was her mother's maiden name. And I just find that like really cool and really interesting how like it kind of plays into that idea of like coming full circle and like I don't know, like fixing the mistakes that other people made. Is like they tried to make Catherine Heathcliff happen and it was a disaster, and so now she's Catherine Earnshaw again. So yeah, I find that really interesting.
I agree entirely. I can't find the picture that I'm looking for because as you said that, the way you blew my mind, well, we're not going to find it. Talk, Taylor, talk.
I didn't even consider that. I think I was so grossed out by just this family tree that I didn't
God, so many cousins.
Yeah.
It's real nasty.
This was me when you were talking about the names. Like,
I love Curtis.
Because that's crazy.
Always a good reaction.
Yeah. But that is amazing.
Oh, that's such a good point. Wow.
Thank you very much.
And I don't know if either of you had anything else to say, but if not, we can all share favorite quotes.
Ooh.
That's a good one. Now I have
I'm
to
gonna
find
try not to choose the basic quote, but we'll see.
Well, I already used up my one obscure one, but I'm sure I'll find another.
I know. I love that one about Isabella.
Oh, I got mine. Okay. Maybe this is a popular one and I just don't know it. I know, like, obviously, like the Haunt Me Then and the Half Savage and whatever, Our Souls Are the Same, all that stuff. This one might be amongst those and I'm just not aware. But I really like, well, this was from, in my edition, page 112, might be different. And I don't even remember who says this. I think it was either Heathcliff or Catherine, but someone said, having leveled my palace, don't erect a hovel and complacently admire your own charity in giving me that for a home.
Ooh.
Damn.
Really good.
I'm going to find who said it because I don't know who said that.
Yeah, I remembered like reading that one and being like, ooh.
Yeah.
Ooh,
Yeah,
I'm
really... Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Taylor. I'm not...
Oh, no, go ahead.
It is
no,
Heathcliff,
I was just going to say I'm really terrible at actually tracking quotes that I like, so this will probably take me a while. So go ahead, Taylor.
I'm just going to go with the basic one because I read out my first favorite. Well, no, the basic one is my favorite quote, but I read out the one I was originally going to read, the one about Catherine being flung out of heaven, which I think is just so interesting and vivid, and I really liked it, but I'm going to go with the basic one, so I apologize.
I love it.
It would degrade me to marry Heathcliff now, so he shall never know how I love him. And that not because he's handsome, Nellie, but because he's more myself than I am. Whatever our souls are made of, his and mine are the same, and Linton's is as different as a moonbeam from lightning or frost from fire. It's just so good.
I know. Yeah. It's okay. I'm basic too, Taylor, because especially the more myself than I am, like that is one of my favorite lines, I think, in anything I've read, because it's just such a like visceral image, even though it doesn't like describe something physically or like with any of the senses. I don't know if you can use the word visceral for that, but it feels like it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that line. Well, I did kind of share this a little bit, but I'm gonna read it rather than badly paraphrasing it. So Catherine, this is like right before Catherine dies, and she says, "Forgive me." And Heathcliff says, "It is hard to forgive and to look at those eyes and feel those wasted hands. Kiss me again and don't let me see your eyes. I forgive what you have done to me. I love my murderer, but yours, how can I?" And I just feel like that's it's like a good quote, first of all, but it also like really emphasizes how these two horribly selfish people, they like the only thing they're selfless about is each other. And I just find that really interesting.
Yeah. It's very in character for the two of them.
Yes.
And I do feel like that's why, even though like it's a terrible, toxic, bad relationship, that people do like cling to that romance element, because like it's impossible to say that they don't love each other. Like they're nuts and they do stupid things, but like I don't disagree. They're obsessed with each other. Like
I believe it, and it's amazing too because we're never really given a reason for why they love each other. We just accept it. Like, I mean, you could argue that the only reason we're given is we're told they were really all the other person had, especially on Heathcliff's side, is like Catherine was the only one who was like there for him consistently. But yeah, it's like this whole book is built on believing that they love each other, and I buy it, even though we have no evidence for it.
Angela shared a quote. Wondered how anyone could imagine unquiet slumbers for the sleepers in that quiet earth, which is so good.
Yeah, and that's the end, right? Yeah, I love that last line. Like that whole like last scene, I really, really love, and I think partly it's because like, again, by comparison, it's like the happiest ending in the world because there was so much suffering in the rest of it. But I just think that's like such a wonderful image to like end the book on. And even the scene before that where like Lockwood is like walking over to Wuthering Heights and like all the doors are open and like the trees are like blooming, or flowers are blooming, and like the wind is blowing through the windows, and like he sees or hears like Hareton and Catherine or young Kathy like together and like learn like reading together, and it's just like it's such a peaceful moment, and it's like I think that partly makes up for having to suffer through all the depressing stuff in the other part of the book.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah.
So I don't know if either of you have anything else to say. If not, I can wrap it up with a quick little, I guess, note about our next live show.
Yeah.
So our next live show will be Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte, and that'll be on Cara's channel. I'm really excited for this one.
I'm nervous, but it's going to be very interesting because backstory for people watching who haven't like heard this, but I have not actually ever finished Jane Eyre. It's one of the only classics that I have DNF'd. I got halfway through and could not do it anymore. So this is going to be really interesting. But I'm excited.
I'm excited too. I feel like it's the literary equivalent of The Office, so I'm ready.
Oh no! Wait, that might explain it because I don't like The Office.
The Office is like my second favorite show.
That's so funny. No. I've like never heard it described that way, but like I see it.
I'm very excited about it because it's just like Wuthering Heights. I've read it once before, but both of them I've only listened to as an audiobook. So I read it physically this time, and I'm going to read Jane Eyre physically this time. And not to put any pressure on how you feel about it, Cara, but when asked the question, what literary character do you relate the most to? I have often answered Jane Eyre. So you can hate the book, but don't hate Jane. I love her.
Yeah, no, I know a lot of people love Jane. I'm like fully prepared to like her as a character. Okay. Yeah, but do you have any recommendations on audiobooks? Because I think I might actually try Jane Eyre on audio to force myself to finish it.
I'll figure out when I listen to audio.
So I unfortunately don't.
I will listen to samples and try to find one. Yeah, and so the date for that is to be decided, but generally we do the Sunday closest to the end of the month.
Yeah.
And like that will be announced, but just like prepare, get ready.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll see. That seems to be around, well, either probably like October 25th or November 1st is probably around.
Yeah, I was looking at the calendar, and November 1st would be like a full month to read it, and that one's kind of long, so that might be good. But yeah,
we're going anywhere for Halloween. So.
Right? No, that's true. All-nighter, just pull an all-nighter reading Jane Eyre.
Honestly, what a night.
Yeah. Okay, I'm trying to see if I had anything else about Wuthering Heights. We actually we talked a lot about what I was thinking.
Oh. Miss Richards writes perfect for Victober too. I don't know what Victober is.
It's a readathon in October where you read Victorian books.
Oh, so wow.
I'm very excited about it.
Oh, that's awesome.
It is perfect. I think I'm actually going to read it as part of that, so it's going to be great.
Yeah, I don't know if it fits any of the prompts for me, but I'm going to count it regardless.
I think I'm going to use it for the one that's like a book you've been meaning to get to, because even though I did not intend to pick it up again, I think the fact that I started reading this when I was maybe 12 counts as I've been meaning to read it for a while.
Oh, and Kate Howe is hosting a read-along for Jane Eyre.
Love it.
And double up.
Oh my gosh, it's going to be the month of Jane Eyre.
Cara's working a long party for me.
We'll see. Maybe I'll fall in love with it this time, and it's going to be the biggest surprise of my year.
I mean, to be fair, I don't think I like Jane Eyre, but I don't think I loved it. I'm pretty sure I gave it 3.5 stars. So maybe keep your low expectations for Wuthering Heights.
Yeah,
it pays off.
That's the way to go into it.
Yeah, I mean,
expect nothing and be pleasantly surprised.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, maybe we'll have one person who didn't like it, one person in the middle, and I know I'm going to give it 5 out of 5 stars again. I know me.
That is
Mr. Rochester is a goof.
Oh my God.
Chester.
He's the reason I quit reading. Is I was liking Jane, but I'm I cannot deal it with him anymore. I just no. I'm out.
Yeah.
I'll just give a hint to everyone. When you read Jane Eyre, don't take Mr. Rochester seriously.
Oh my gosh.
So much better when you imagine it like an episode of The Office where Mr. Rochester is Michael Scott and Jane Eyre is Jim Halpert looking into the camera.
Yeah. Honestly, you're not wrong.
I will take that under advisement.
Okay. So thank you everyone for tuning in. This was so much fun. Of course, I put the links to Cara and Julia's channels down below, so please subscribe to them as well. They are both amazing. And thank you so much for watching, everyone. And we will see you next month on Cara's channel to talk about Jane Eyre. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.